Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco dish out on movies. Oh god, that sounded bad. The only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food, and it's just Marco here once again. I am here today to talk about a book. It's not a Goosebumps book. It's not a book that you would probably want to read, or if you've already read it, props to you for getting through it, because there were times where I felt like quitting. There were times where I was like, I don't know about this one. Uh, but I stuck through it, and honestly, I don't regret it at all. This book was an experience, and the book that I'm talking about is Killer Fiction, written by Gerard John Schaefer. Dead man, he died in prison because correctional officers conspired to kill him, and then they made it look like another inmate did it. Of course, a black inmate, so that you'd have the double, like, oh, of course he probably did it. You know, that's another thing about this case, is that that's one of the more interesting things, is that, this is yet another case where the guy was just about to talk. He was just about to talk. And then all of a sudden, dead. Winds up dead in a cell. Has full handprints, bloody handprints. They stabbed out his eyeballs. It's really bad. I mean, it's just so embarrassing, like how many cases there are where the guy was just about to get caught. He was just about to say something. Herb Baumeister, the one that I'm most interested. He is definitely my number one most interested serial killer. I love. I don't love love, but he's the most interesting because of his weird case, and just before he got caught, actually. They knew where he was going. They let him go to Canada. I mean, just imagine that. Police let a serial killer go to Canada, and then a Canadian officer found him and saw all these videotapes and papers and things, evidence that he had. Then all of a sudden, he's quote-unquote committed suicide on the beach. And then all the evidence has just magically disappeared. Like, yeah, I really believe that. Like, what a bunch of fucking bullshit. And then you have, what's another one? The Boston Strangler, quote-unquote. Albert DeSalvo. What happened with him? He was just about to say, whatever he called it, the full story, the true story. I'm going to give you the real Boston Strangler. Then what happens? He's dead. And then, what's another one? The Monster of Florence. He had some weird thing where someone switched his medication and gave him medication that gave him a heart attack. But he's dead. He can't talk. And it's like, why are we as a society so complicit in this, to where, we just accept it? It's like, oh yeah, that's okay. These people, there needs to be some action that's taken against these people for, abusing the system, to where they, like with Jeffrey Epstein, that they had some steroid correctional officer kill him. I've read all about that shit. Boot prints all over his back. Guess what? There were boot prints all over Gerard Schaefer's back. I wonder how those got there. And they were correctional officers' boots. That was something I didn't expect about this case, because everyone really they just say definitively that he was killed by the black inmate, Vincent Riviera. They just say that definitively, and they don't even question the story, even though the facts just completely point to a conspiracy. I mean, just completely, to where it's almost laughable. that people just blindly accept this shit. It's a good thing that I was only like a little tiny kid back then, because I would have raised hell over that. So, and I know I got off track as soon as I started the review, but this was a pretty long book. It said that it was 1,000 pages, but it was really 200 something. I don't know. It said on Hoopla that it was 1,000, and so it took me like the whole month to read it. Like, tomorrow was my last day to read it, and then it would have been returned back to the library. So, you may be asking, why did I read this book? Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a filmmaker, sure, but I also wanted to be a detective. I have a very investigative, inquisitive mind. I'm very curious. I like to explore the complicated facets of the human mind and different perspectives, and I like learning about these weird cases where people commit these murders, and then it's always the same story too. It just so happens to always be the same story. There was that one guy, and he was crazy, and he killed people, and then he went to prison. Like, it's just always the same old shit. And I'm really interested in this type of stuff, especially because if I'm making films, I can just make a movie about one of these serial killers, and then, do some really interesting take on each one. Not like the main ones, but like ones that are actually interesting and actually, need some attention. And I think that this is one of those ones. I think that this book, Killer Fiction, it was made with ill intent. The author of this book, and that's something that I'm going to get into. I'll just get into it right now. And now, I'm not saying I like Gerard Schaefer at all, okay? Because you can tell that he was a bad guy. I mean, he was really he was really, really bad, okay? And he knew it. He knew it, and that's what's sad, is that there's all these warning signs. There's all these times where you just read the text and you wish that you could go back and help him and give him some sort of a guidance towards a better lifestyle. And the author of this book, she dated him, and I'm not going to say her name because I don't want to glamorize her name. She dated him, and she said that she didn't want to be his counselor, and that all the time he would tell her about his fantasies, about how he would like to murder and rape women, and she got sick of it, and I think she broke up with him. I can't remember. And it's like, that's really weird. Like, I'm sorry, but that's just so weird. And then she came back years later when he's in prison in the 90s, and that's when she came back to him. He was in prison since the 70s. But in the 90s, she came to him and said, hey, you want to write some killer fiction for me? You want to write some stories? Can I use your other stories that you wrote back in the past? And he said, yeah, I'd really like to do that. Let's make a deal where, if I'm found guilty, then you can call me a serial killer, and I'll tell you all sorts of things. And he had this manipulative way of, like, just, it was like he was spinning a spider's web for her, where he was like, okay, I'm going to do this and that, and you're going to do this and that. It's very much like Hannibal Lecter in that sense, in the way that he had a very clear vision. even though he pretended a lot in this book. You know, he said some things like, I don't remember everything. It's pointless to dredge up the past and stuff like that. But then on other occasions, see, that's another thing. He's a very cryptic person. And it was a little troubling with the book because it was confusing. And it was hard to really read between his lines of mental illness. I mean, you can tell that he's mentally ill. I mean, I've seen he has an hour-long interview on YouTube. I've seen that interview about 2 or 3 times, all the way through. And, you know, you can tell he's mentally ill. You can tell that he needs help, like medical attention. And, you know, it's, I mean, he is so fucking retarded that he's talking about he says that on one hand, the beginning of the video, he's like, this is just all ridiculous. You know, that lawyer, you know, he married my wife. And, you know, there's all this, everyone's against me. And then at the end of the interview, he's like, yeah. And then when the beast comes out, the mood is right. And it's like, what in the like, what is this guy? Like, this guy has a problem. He's not just, he knows what he's doing, but it's not just that. He has some sort of a health issue in his brain that can be remedied, hopefully, with help, with, like, just staying in the asylum forever. But still, it was very apparent. And then, I mean, guys, he was so dumb when he was talking. He you know how when people, like, when they like things, they like to talk about things, they salivate, they lick their lips. This guy, at one point in the interview, he literally sticks his tongue, like, all the way out of his mouth while describing this quote-unquote, this short story, this crime story, this quote-unquote scenario. You know, he's like, he just sticks his tongue all the way out. And it's like, guys, look at this fucking weirdo. I mean, you don't think that you just think that he's bad, he was born bad. Like, no, he has a problem. He needs to be looked at and studied under a microscope to figure out what is going on in his brain. Because when he stuck his tongue so far out, it was about to, like, pop out of his mouth like a cartoon. Like, he was like, and it's right when he was talking about, like, cutting a woman's chest open and, like, disemboweling her. And it's like, okay, you know, this guy has got a problem, whether he's a killer or not. Which, you know, I can guarantee you he's killed people. That's for sure. At the same time, something very interesting that I don't think a lot of people have even considered is that he would be the perfect guy to take the fall for any number of crimes. Okay? He is like Paul Dano in Prisoners, in the sense that, you know, he just talks and talks and talks and talks. He rambles on. He gives unnecessary little details. He says some dumbass shit. He contradicts himself all the time. You know, he says all this shit to be shocking, so he'll say, like, the N-word once in a while just to be shocking. He'll, talk about all these different sexual fantasies and kinks and shit. You know, he would be the perfect person to say, yeah, he did it. He's a serial killer. He killed everyone in history. And, you know, all these other unsolved cases, it was him. Because at one point in the book, he said that he was going to start, like, taking the fall for all the murders. Like, a detective could just say, there's this one murder in California, and he'll be like, oh yeah, I did that one too. And it's like, this guy's fucking stupid. he is just stupid. He is probably one of the stupidest killers I have ever seen. And that's saying something, because I have read about a lot of killers. I mean, he's just, but that's what's so interesting, is that he's so entertaining in that sense. That, like, all these other killers, they wouldn't say anything like he's saying in public. They wouldn't go into this explicit detail where he's like, yeah, I tied her up, and then I fucked her ass, and then I killed her, and then I came back and fucked her ass again, and then I came back and fucked her ass again, and I went to sleep next to her. Like, I mean, he is just, he'll say everything. He'll literally just say everything, no matter, like, just the most outrageous things possible. And it's really hard. It's so muddy to figure out, what is it with him? Like, what is his problem? What happened? How did it happen? Who did it? How was this person shaped into the quote unquote sex beast? Because he loves to call himself the sex beast. Like, throughout the whole book, he is the sex beast. And it made me think of Grand Theft Auto with the fucking, in the multiplayer, you can play as this beast character, and where you just run around and visit different locations, and then, if someone finds you and kills you, you lose. That's what it reminded me of. Like, it was that, like, outrageous. The whole book was. It just went from one outrageous thing to another. But I need to finish talking about the author of the book, because she really creeped me out. Like, honestly, I got creeped out by him, but, at least he let you know. At least he's telling you outright, like, I like, that woman. I strangled her, and then I cut her ears off, and then I stuck a knife up her vagina. At least he's saying this stuff outright. But this authoress, she comes off as a very sinister, leechy character, by the way that she acts. And, because let's just go over it. The biggest problem with this book is the format. The format, the structure, terrible. Terribly done. Probably the worst structured book I've ever read. Because it starts off, and it's like, okay, I'm reading a book by a serial killer. It is basically, and I'll tell you what this book is like. It is like an American Psycho when the secretary sees, the inside of Patrick Bateman's sketchbook. That's what this is like. So it's literally that. Like, so if you ever wonder what would be inside Patrick Bateman's desk, this book is it. And that's probably the coolest thing about it, is that it's so, it's real. It's real. And that's what's really cool. But the authoress, she just comes off as like the ultimate sellout, in the way that, there's this weird thing where it starts off and you think you're going to read a book by a serial killer, but it starts off, and for hundreds of pages, it's like these weird essays by police detectives, and by her saying, like, this is really disturbing, it's really explicit. And then she comes on and she's like, Gerard Schaefer, he was a racist, and he was a sexist, and he was a bad guy. And she, like, rambles on for like 500 pages. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, I wanted to read about Gerard's fucking weird-ass fantasy world. I didn't want to read about, like, I was dating him, and then, like, he was a bad boy and stuff. And then at the end of the book, she details, like, she shows his letters, and she shows like all the letters he ever sent to her almost. But she never shows any of her letters to him, or at least from what I can remember. And so it comes off as really, really creepy and distasteful, the way that this person, she just clearly wants to make money, because I guess she was engaged to Danny Rolling. She did a book with another killer. Like, what the hell? Like, I applaud the idea of like getting into the killer's heads and getting like personal books written by them and stuff like that, so that we can really like see that different perspective, to prevent future crimes, and to see warning signs, all that kind of stuff. But she just comes off as total scummy and creepy and weird. I mean, really, really weird. I mean, it figures that she dated him for a while, because, I mean, it's like, a normal woman would not have dated him at all. I mean, they said like he was a peeping Tom as a little boy and stuff. Like, he had some problems, and he's just he's so cryptic though. Like, he is such a weird character that I still at this moment can't figure him out. Because when I read that about he was crying, he was in severe pain as a teenager, dating her, saying that he had these fantasies, saying like, I just want to kill a woman, I want to rape her, I want to do all this stuff. I felt really, really like bad for him in that way. And I was like, what, like, this is really kind of weird that he was just able to, mosey on through. And, I've written some horror stories before. I wrote one that I sort of based around, it around Fargo, and I based it around like other dark comedy crime movies. But it's not a fantasy. You can tell the difference between this guy's writing and then someone like Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho. You can tell the difference. And that's what's really disturbing about these stories, is that it just feels like he needs to vent in some way. And so he's using you to vent. And it's still interesting though. Like, it's very interesting. But the format is just so shit. I mean, it starts off, you have that whole block of pages, and it's an essay, and it's helpful. I mean, it is helpful for the book, but I don't like the placement of all these different things. I think that it's horribly structured. And that's another thing, is that it feels like it was sloppily put together so that she could release it as soon as possible and make the most money. And I think that that's another really big issue that I had, was that even with how the book was put together, I could see, like, she really wants to make money. And he even said in the interview, he was like, her number one motive is making money. And it's like, I can. That's probably the truest thing he's ever said, honestly. It's probably the only 100% honest thing he's ever said behind bars. But he is a very interesting character. But the stories is what I came for. And the stories, they range from really good to really bad. Because, let's just get into the stories. I mean, they are explicit. Let's just say that. Like, do not read this if you are squeamish, because it gets really, really bad. And she warns you about that over and over and over again. That was another annoying thing, was that before I mean, what do you think I'm reading this book for? It says killer fiction. There's pictures on the cover of fucking drawings of women naked with nooses on them and shit. Like, what do you think I'm reading this for? Fucking, rainbows and twirly wads? Twirly wads. Twirly wands, I don't know. But she goes into this long apology about, like, I'm so sorry. So sorry. I just feel it's important for you to read this. But it's sexist. It's racist. It's disturbing. It is just, the stories are so evil. Oh my God. I hope you survive reading these stories because you can then buy my next book. It's a whole long thing, and she had trouble publishing it. She had trouble with the letter people, and I read about that too, because I was researching to possibly do videos about that too, but that didn't really come to anything. Writing certain letters, and you can't write this letters. Like, it was like this long, unnecessary detail, terribly put together. It's too bad, because I really feel like this book was bungled. I feel like this book was a big missed opportunity to make like a A+ masterpiece classic book. Oh God, that sounded bad. Book. Because if you really told this story right, if you structured it right, it would be really good. But as is, it's still really good, because I can extract the things that are, really good, and just keep those for me, and then just disregard. I skimmed through a lot of it too. There were a lot of parts where I just skimmed over, because I was like, okay, this is just gonna be the same old shit. I even did that with his shitty writing. There were points where he was like, and I just skimmed through it, and I was like, okay, man, like, you're just fucking, like, you don't always need to pay close attention to what a mentally ill person is saying when he's rambling about his bullshit. But then it gets into the juicy details, okay? And probably my favorite part of the book are the short stories, but at the same time, I would say that with a caution, because I do think that the short stories are pretty lame. They're pretty lame, and they're pretty, like, by the book. Like, all of them sort of turn out the same. All of them, none of them are very good stories. Like, that's the sad part. Like, there was one, and it was called, there was one called Detective Dan Kelly, Rogue Cop. It was the longest one, and it could have been the best one, but it was not. Okay, it was very weird, especially since Gerard Schaefer was a cop. It's all about this corrupt cop, and I guess he finds this, like, runaway girl, and he forces her to be his sex slave, and then in exchange he'll introduce her to Don Johnson and shit, and he's also pimping her out and stuff like that, and it's just, like, really weird. And the way that he talks, his character talks, that's another thing, is that with a lot of these stories, the way that his character talks just make you, like, want to throw up. Like, by how cringeworthy his dialogue is. Like, the way that he talks, he picks up girls, like, it's just really cringeworthy. And and then the way that he talks to, like, his superiors at the police station, he's like, do whatever the fuck I want. Like, he's just, you can just see that he's fantasizing. Like, this is fantasy. It's not reality. It's not a a story, it's just him going like, yeah, and in this badass story, I'm going to have this detective character, and he's going to tell off his boss and do all this stuff. And like, there's this one scene, I could go on about this book for hours because there's just so many small details because they're all short stories. There's this one scene where he's on the phone and he's on a tip line talking to someone about how Gerard Schaefer in prison told Detective Dan Kelly the identity of a serial killer, and he'll give her the name if she gives him the reward money and fucks him whenever he wants. And it's like this long, drawn-out thing where he's like, you do what I say or else I'm not going to give the name. And it's like, it's just so bad. It's just so bad. And then in that story, too, he's referencing killer fiction. The runaway girl, she's at the kitchen table reading killer fiction. And he's like, oh, yeah, that's really good. They hand out copies of those at different police departments, just so you know. And it's really good. And he has a tendency to ramble. And that becomes a huge issue in his later stories, because in his later stories, well, okay, they're near the later stories, they literally all follow the same format, where there's a senior character, or he's older, and he finds like a younger character, or a younger character finds him, and then he starts rambling, and he's like, and then the younger character's like, really? And then he's like, yeah, and like these long paragraphs, and it's like, this is terrible dialogue, like just these long paragraphs that are just rambling and rambling. It's like, God, this is terrible writing. I thought this guy took a creative writing class. Like, there's this one where he's on like a prison work release program, and he meets this young gay guy. He's bisexual, because he's in prison, and so he lets guys have sex with him so that he can survive. And he's got alcohol, and Gerard Schaefer's like, yeah, give me some. And then he's like, yeah, you did your French maids and French prostitutes, and their pussies and smell like them, and they'll taste like cherry. And then the character's like, cherry? And he's like, yeah, just rambling on. And then they get to like a hotel, and they meet these French prostitutes, and they have sex with them, and then they kill them. Or at least he kills them, and then he kills the guy too, and it's like, it's just so weird. It's just so it really is gross too. Like, I have completely undervalued the grossness of this book and how I've talked about it. Like, I am a very, very like sexual person. My favorite show is Californication. But the way that he just, not even in the raping parts, but just in the general descriptions that he gives of women, is like just the grossest. Like, every single thing he says is gross. Like, the first short story that he does is this really, really boring one where I'm not kidding you, he spends like 10 pages describing this woman, how she looks, how she smells, and it's just, ugh. And he's picking her up at this club, and then it's like she has a boyfriend, but she's mad at him, so she fucks Gerard instead, and Gerard is like, and my masculinity was so strong. Like, he's really like, in this book, he really overcompensates a lot, because he's constantly talking about his quote-unquote masculinity and his macho-ness. Like, it's really hilarious. Like, he sees himself as this and you see him in prison, and he's like this fucking this roll of jelly. He's sitting there and he's like, yeah, I strolled up to the sexy cougar, and my masculinity was very strong that night. It's so funny. and he just the descriptions he goes into. Like, this guy, I don't know if it's I know he has a thing for shit and piss, that's for sure, because if you took a shot or a sip of beer every time he mentions shit and or piss or pissing, you would be fucking dead from alcohol poisoning. Like, he describes shit in so many different ways. Like, he describes, like, fermented shit, like, all sorts of shit in this book. He likes to piss on girls' faces. Like, it's really bizarre, this guy's writing. And it just comes off as so weird. It's like just the weirdest thing you could ever read. But I'm thankful to have read it, because, we'll never get something like this again. This kind of insight into someone's mentally ill mind. But I don't know if he has a thing for, like, he keeps on talking about a woman's pussy like it has a musk to it, and he's attracted to this earthy smell that comes at, like, ugh. Like, he is just, like, the grossest, like, ugh. It was so hard to read at certain points at the beginning, and then you get used to it, and it's like, ugh, ugh. He is just, every description he uses, even if it's like okay, he's having sex. And that's another thing that I noticed, was that he hardly, if ever, has any consensual sex in the book. He'll talk about it. Like, he'll say, yeah, I fucked some French prostitutes before, but he never really talks about, like, okay, he never makes that a part of the story. It's always has to be forced, stuff like that. It's pretty creepy. And as I said, he always talks about shit. I mean, there's so much shit in this book. It should have been called Killer Shit. It should have been called Shit Fiction. Instead of Pulp Fiction, Shit Fiction. Because, I mean, there's this one really gross story where he, and I'm not even done talking about the grossness yet. I mean, as I said, there's so much stuff to talk about. But there's this part where he's talking about how he broke into this woman's house, and he, like, stuck a finger up her ass, and it was all dirty, and he was like, you see this? The flies love it. He made her sniff her finger, and then he sniffed her finger, and then he licked he licked the finger, and then he pissed on her. It's like, God, this guy is so weird. He's just so gross, and it's like, why? Like, that's the weird thing, is that's how you can tell that he's fucked up, because he could easily write a story, a novel, a long work where, there's actually a story. But instead, he just has these quote-unquote scenarios where, you have something like this, and then I don't think he rapes her, I can't remember. He doesn't, and then he threatens her, and he says, I can rape you at any time, I can get to you at any time, and so then, like, he jogs by her house every day and smiles at her. Like, really, really weird. And probably the best part of the book, well, okay, there was one part of the book that I loved, and it was the Cattle Kate story, because it was almost, to me, a lot of the stuff in this book was like a GTA 5 game, because in the story, he he hangs this woman, and there's some gross stuff with shit there. Like, I'm not gonna talk about the protruding shit. Okay, I just did. But he takes this girl, and he throws her to the bottom of like a rock quarry into the water. And then he says that he goes scuba diving just to look at the body like days later. It's like, as I said, like, this is just insane, this writing. It's just so insane and out there that it's entertaining somehow. It's just too bad we didn't get more, because this book, it was broken up into two books. There was a second half called Beyond Killer Fiction, and that part was just as good as the first. And so, but the part that I really, really liked was when he talked about Ted Bundy, because he talked about kind of his little encounter where he and Ted hung out together, and Ted's jealous of him because they like have this conversation where they're one-upping each other, and he's like, you know what I did? I stabbed this girl, and then I hung her, and then I fucked her head, and then I pissed on her face, like, and then Ted's like, huh, really? Shit. And then Ted starts telling a story, and it's like, it's just too bad it's not written well, because it's almost like a classic scene where you have these two killers, and they're like, you did that? Oh, I did this. And it's like really, really weird, and and gross too. And really just, that's another thing, is that this book, it's very, very unsympathetic to the victims, because it has to be, because it's a different perspective. So, it's not really like the guy, he sees all women as Kates. He even says he called all of his victims Kates based off of the Cattle Kate story. And so you're not going to get much emotion in terms of that in the book. The only emotion that I really got was the beginning part, when they talked about how as a teenager he would start crying because he was having all these fantasies and shit, and he got no help whatsoever from anyone. That was kind of disturbing to read. And that's always disturbing. That's always like the best part of a crime book, where you find out the backstory. Like with Red Dragon, Thomas Harris's Red Dragon, my favorite part of that book is the backstory, where you just hear all this backstory from Francis Dollarhide. It's such a great origin story, and it's just so good. That's the best part of the book. But the Ted Bundy is so gross. Like he's even grosser than Gerard Schaefer. But the thing is, he didn't really talk. He didn't say anything. He didn't go into these long descriptions. But Gerard, actually, he had a reputation for being a rat, and for just talking all the secrets about everyone. And so he talked about, there was this gross part where they discussed having sex with corpses. And I think it was called like ghouls or something, because the whole chapter is about ghouls. And it's the first time I've ever heard people calling someone a ghoul. Like, I never really heard that before, except for with Ed Gein. But Gerard talks about how, like, Ted Bundy, he didn't mind the maggots. And so apparently he would go back to corpses in the forest weeks later, and he would have sex with corpses with maggots all over them. I mean, oh, God. And then Gerard, he didn't like them, and so he was talking about, like, he would, like, put bags on their heads to make the maggots not go there, and, like, just, like, these guys, like, they are sick. They're mentally sick. they need help. They don't need to just be put in the electric chair and killed so that you can spend more money, because that's a big misconception, is that you pay a lot more to kill a criminal than to keep them locked up. Fun fact. But something else that's sad is that some other emotion came from the way that Gerard described the prisons. He described the death row. It was very, very disturbing. Or it could have been, because of how humiliating and dehumanizing it is. And there's a lot of people who don't care. Well, who cares? Two wrongs don't make a right. But he really goes into detail talking about people being put to death in the electric chair, how they can be humiliated. Like, there was this one cop, and he killed other cops, and his really, really gross death. And then he talked about, like, this whore who got killed. There was this one racist story called M-Word Jack, where, like, it was basically all about these two guys who, they're really horny, and so they organized it to where they could have sex with the dead body, this dead hooker, after she was electrocuted. And so they, like, go into detail about having sex with her dead body, and it's, like, really, really gross. And but you get this strong sense of emotion from that, because it's like, if you could just imagine being in that situation where you're going to be put on the electric chair, just how terrifying that would be. It's just too bad that he couldn't do the same for his victims, because I really think that if he had written a story, like, from his victim's point of view too, that would also evoke some emotion, because he talked in the book a little bit about, like, feeling sorry, quote unquote. I didn't know what to believe, because he was so manipulative, and so everything he talked about was because of getting something. Everything he talked about was like, oh, and if you want to avoid the draft, you should dress up in drag and say you're queer, and then they'll just laugh you out of the room. It just, everything that he does comes with getting something. He is all about getting things, and all about satisfying his needs, his urges. Just, everything he does is just because he wants something from you. And I think that's it's sad, because as well, if he didn't turn out to be a serial killer, he could have been a good writer. He could have written some stories and made some money or something. But it's just sad that all that happened, and all the victims, how a lot of them won't ever be found. They won't ever be known about, because the correctional guards had to kill him, conspire and kill him, and stuff like that. It's sad. And the fact that he wouldn't talk, he basically, he was playing, it was weird, because it was like he was playing a game where he was going to talk about them at certain points, and he just contradicted himself too. And it's just a very confusing, sad situation. And I really think that if, and I would like to make it a movie for sure, because I could definitely, because that's the thing about these stories, is that they need fixing. A lot of them, they're just bad. They're just plain, like, a lot of them I skimmed through, because they're just the same old shit. They really need some retooling, and I really think, though, that you can make a really entertaining movie out of this, where it's like an anthology movie, or I don't know. But you could create something out of this book and make a really good movie, and have some emotion in it for the victims, because I really think that the book, although it's really, really good, it completely, the emotion isn't there for the victims. It's just all about describing, like, these graphic killings and rapes and corpse fucking. It's not about, like, telling a good story even. So it's kind of like a lost cause, because he's dead and he can't edit anything anymore. And so it's just a shame. It's a shame that this all happened. And when I really came to, and I know that I've kind of seemed insensitive, but I don't really care because it's a book. That's how you have to view this, because it's a different perspective. And so I'm not, like, talking about the real events. I'm talking about this book that he wrote, all these stories, these fantasies. But when I really came to realize, like, just how evil this guy was I saw this documentary, and I skipped forward to footage of him walking into the courtroom, and I was almost, like, freaking out, because when he was arrested, like, before he looks like this puffy marshmallow guy, looks like a fucking nerd, fucking loser. He looks like the character that he described in the book. And to just think how creepy that is, that, like, he really was that character that he wrote about. Like, it's just so creepy. Like, he is such a evil, like, you can just see it in his face. He has but he's ill, he's mentally ill. It was a very shocking moment, because just most of what you see of him is when he's older. You never see him when he's young like this. But when he's young in these pictures, you can tell that was the guy in the stories for sure. Like, he wasn't just writing fiction. He wasn't just writing, I'm just writing some scenarios. So anyways, I could still go on, honestly. I'm just tired. I've talked about this for like an hour, okay? I give this book, though, I still give it an A+, because it was literally like peeking into the American Psycho, into his desk, and seeing his journals. And so it's such a unique experience that you'll never get to see again, hopefully, because hopefully there won't be any serial killers in the future. So, anyways, please like this video, comment, tell me what you thought about Gerard Schaefer, if you met him, if you talked about sucking pussy with him, because that was another weird thing. He has so many weird fetishes that, he has to mention ones, like, once in a while. Like, that was another thing, was that a lot of his stories felt incomplete. Like, in the Detective Dan Kelly one, there was a real sex beast that was running around, and that he describes it as hairy. It's like King Kong, and it raped a girl so much that it, like, burst open her uterus. Like, there was a real, like, monster running around, and he never resolves that story. It's just some weird thing that's happening in this town, like it's Twin Peaks or something. And there's so many stories that he doesn't resolve. Like, he, as I said, the stories about how he gets this runaway girl and he makes her his slave, and then that's never gets resolved. And then there was another very disturbing part where there's this Muslim guy, and I guess he's racist towards Muslims too. There's this Muslim guy, and he runs a sex slave operation, and he has all these ones all these dead bodies, and he killed them all because they all had AIDS. And that story never gets resolved either. There were so many stories in this that just felt like they weren't resolved and they weren't complete. Like, to me, there's a difference between telling a short story and cutting a story short. You know what I mean? Like, he cut all these stories short, in my opinion, so that people would ask for more. And I think that there's something there with that, you know. Anyways, please, as I said, like it, subscribe. Subscribe to our channel, because I will review so many more books in the future. This was an experience, to say the least. Maybe someday I can make the Killer Fiction movie, because I would love to. Like, you know, see, this is why I like to research serial killers, is because I can get interesting material, and I can you know, because I can bring the emotion that this book is missing, because this book really, you know, you're dissociated from the people in the story, except for the main guy, who is, you know, he's basically just coming in his pants the whole story, because he's such a weird, creepy, fucking evil piece of shit. So anyways, yeah. Goodbye, everybody. See you soon.